So we are recording. And very important couple notes. One is this is a webinar, so we'll be using the opportunity to kind of click through a bunch of slides. There will be time for questions and conversation. And at that point, I will unmute you all. You can also unmute yourself if you want to say something at any time. We also have a chat function. And the chat function is down at the bottom there on your screen, and you can feel free to chat at any time. And Alex and I will be tracking the chat. And I will be leading this webinar along with our partner and my son, Alex. Alex, do you want to unmute yourself and say hello?
Hello, happy to be here, excited. This is always a good conversation, and I'm looking forward to a good discussion and dialogue after the content piece is over.
Great. Great, so I want to acknowledge something important. Someone who's extremely important to us in our team took a bad fall off a roof yesterday. That is our dear friend, Mark Durgan, who is actually on the call with us. That is Mark. So Mark, do you want to just take a moment and say hi to everybody and let us know how you're doing?
Sure. Hello, everybody. This is Mark. Doing okay for what happened. Walking and moving around a little bit, just in a lot of pain. But have some real good doctors around here. So we'll find out some more information tomorrow, but looking forward to the presentation today.
Thanks, Mark. And only Mark would fall off his roof yesterday and be on a webinar today. Mark's a hero, and we love you, and we wish you the best for quick healing. So I want to start us off with a centering, a brief one, but we know the presence is really, really important in the coach approach. And I love seeing already people are shifting in your chairs. Good for you, like me. So just inviting you, regardless of where you are, if you have a little dog with you, if you're by yourself, just to, oh, there's the puppy. There's the puppy. There, oh, cute. Oh, for those of you who can't see it, we're looking at an adorable puppy, and you're muted, Diana, but we can certainly see the picture. So thank you for sharing your puppy with us. We could all just sort of meditate on the dog as a centering practice. But rather than do that, just inviting you to feel your feet on the ground. Yeah. And just let your breath drop. We've all come from busy days. Just letting our breaths drop, letting our bodies relax. And letting ourselves just be here for these 45 minutes. Sharing in this learning experience. Staying fully present. Get a chance to practice. Practice being present for the time when we're together. Wonderful. And with that, I'm going to share my screen. All right, let's start from the beginning. Okay, so coach approach to difficult conversations. We found a lot of interest in this topic as we did coach approach training. People would say to us, what about when we have to have a difficult conversation with someone? How does that work? So we designed this training to support this question of a difficult conversation. How do we use the coach approach when we have to have difficult conversations? And our definition of difficult conversations is anytime we feel vulnerable or our self-esteem is implicated, when the issues at stake are important and the outcome uncertain, when we care deeply about what is being discussed or about the people with whom we are discussing it, there is a potential for us to experience the conversation as difficult. And I don't know about you, but that sounds like a lot of the time those things are in play. And the other thing that we want to just start out with is this idea of difficult conversations. What makes a conversation difficult, right? It has two sides to it. It can be, well, it's difficult. Seems like there's often a case that the conversation is going to be difficult. It's difficult for us. The conversation is difficult for us, and it's also difficult for the other person. And we want in this program to hit both sides. What do we do to help it be less difficult for the other person? What do we do to help it be less difficult for us? And the coach approach really helps us with how do we help it be less difficult for the other person. The coach approach mindset, and these are just reminders to you. We have deep respect for each individual's own learning and development, their who-ness. So we come in with deep respect. We want to meet the person where they are and support them in growing. We know that our intention is always to help the person be stronger, more independent, and more in choice. And we're aware of our own biases and what we think the person should do, and we hold these lightly. So a lot of the coach approach says, we're holding lightly our ideas about what is best. Yes, difficult conversations, we can come into them feeling like, okay, I have this thing I have to say, and it has to be this monologue. And we're saying in a coach approach, no, we're really imagining that we're having a conversation. This is a conversation, like with all of our coach approach conversations. We also have the skill set to bring to bear in difficult conversations. The skill of presence and centering, absolutely essential, even when something goes awry, to be able to come back and be centered, to be able to listen, to be able to clarify, to make sure we're understanding the other person's point of view, to be able to ask good questions, to be able to give feedback, mostly positive feedback, to support accountability, and always to be modeling, always to be modeling. And then, of course, we want to bring SCARF and VUCA into the conversation as well, because you remember the videos, you remember the David Rock video and the monkey video, and we have a little bit of the monkey in the background there. We talked about the challenge of all of us being wired for SCARF. And as we think about having a difficult conversation with someone, how does it help us if we're aware of the possible snags to their status, to their certainty, to their autonomy, their relatedness, or their fairness? It is just this scarf that I think can cause us to think, uh-oh, I'm really not sure how this is going to go. I'm really concerned I might hurt their feelings, or it might harm the relationship, or I might damage their status. And then we're also remembering that we have a VUCA world that we're living in, that part of our jobs as leaders is to help people, help all the people that we're dealing with our scarf in this VUCA world. How can we make the world safe? So one of the underlying assumptions is that we can help others find difficult conversations less difficult as we're paying attention to their scarf. As we're mindful, how am I helping or not their status? Status is certainly one that comes up in difficult conversations. And you may remember from the David Rock video, he talked about feedback really very much tweaking people's status. So how can our awareness of this support us in making sure the difficult conversation doesn't have to be that difficult? Now, we also want to share with you this perspective on creating a psychologically safe culture. This is Amy Edmondson. And she talked about organizations can inadvertently create a psychologically dangerous sense where people are afraid of admitting mistakes, where they blame others, where people are less likely to share different views or conflicting views or having opposing views. And as a result, it's kind of the least common denominator, right? Why would I challenge an assumption or challenge an idea if I don't feel safe? And the idea that we can really help people create a psychologically safe culture, one where they are comfortable at admitting mistakes. We allow people to learn from failure. People openly share ideas, and there's better innovation and decision making. So how do we create this psychologically safe culture? How do we help people feel more safe? And we talked about this with the coach approach. So connecting these two things, when we're present, focused, and listening to understand, we build status and relatedness. As we give people our 100% attention, right, we let them know that they're important to us. And we really do want to understand what they have to say. We also want to be clear in our expectations of people, building certainty. Sorry about that. We also want to ask questions to build critical thinking skills, helping the person build autonomy. We want to offer mostly positive feedback, building certainty and relatedness. And I want to linger on this one for a moment. We often ask how many of you have enough positive feedback, and we're hoping that during the training, we really made a strong point and a strong case for the value of positive feedback. And the question we asked was, how many of you get enough positive feedback? And we could also ask the question, how many of us give enough positive feedback? One of the things that can help difficult conversations be less difficult for the other person is knowing we hold them in high positive regard. Making sure they know that we value them, care about them, appreciate them. It goes back to that idea of the emotional bank account, right? Where we either have deposits or withdrawals on that account. And the opportunity to be mindful, am I in a positive balance? Am I in the black here? That I have a positive balance that whoever you are, whoever I'm talking about, that I care about you, I value you, and you're not concerned that the relationship is in jeopardy. And then finally, when we communicate, we intend to be clear and transparent, building certainty, status, and fairness. So this is a reminder that as we think about helping difficult conversations be less difficult for others, the coach approach stands us in good stead. But what makes these conversations difficult for us? That's another question altogether. So we can make them less difficult for the other person, but oftentimes what stops the conversation, what keeps it from happening, is us, not the other person. So some of the things that make these conversations difficult for us. First, when we aren't clear or confident in taking a stand for what's important to us. When we're not clear about what is exactly going on here. We're not sure how we feel. It's a little muddy. Do I have the right to have this conversation? Or maybe the stakes seem so high that we don't have the conversation because maybe it'll go away by itself, or it's my fault, or I'm scared, or one of our favorites, he or she won't like me. How many times do we not have an important conversation because we're afraid the person won't like us? We're afraid it will jeopardize the relationship. And linger on that for a moment, because in the coach approach, we're saying that some of the best things that we can do in terms of creating a relationship is to share our truth with someone else. Can we trust you with the truth? Can I trust this person with my truth? Right? So he or she won't like me. Now, is that a risk I need to take? Or is that just an idea that I'm making up, that I'm imagining the relationship is so fragile that having an honest conversation could jeopardize it? If you're like me, one of the things that happens is you play the conversation over and over in your mind and get stressed. So I think about what I'm going to say. I think about what the other person's going to say. Then I think again about what I'm going to say and how did that go? And so a lot of it is in my head in the shower while I'm driving, a lot, and I get stressed. sometimes we're unclear in our own minds as to the next step. We know we have to have a conversation, but we're not entirely clear on where it needs to go. It can happen that our frustration just builds up and we get angry. And then the conversation is really difficult because, well, because we think it could really blow up the relationship. And there's a great book called Leadership and Self-Deception that talks about this. And finally, we have conflicting values between telling the truth and protecting ourselves or others. So for all of these reasons, it can be very, very challenging for us. The problem with the difficult conversation can be us. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about a time where the difficult conversation went well for me. And I'm going to open up, as soon as I tell you the story, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We'll open up the microphones and we'll hear your stories of a time when you had a difficult conversation and it went really well. And inviting you to think about what made that conversation go well. So my story is about someone who I care greatly about, an elderly nun, actually, who did a lot of teaching for me in this area of companioning the dying. And she's a lovely, lovely person, and she was in an assisted living kind of a model. And she became very distrustful of the people around her and her finances. So she asked me to take her to the bank. And then she wanted all her banking information, all her financial information to go to me. Is anybody getting at least alarmed by this? Well, I want to be the good guy. I wanted to say, fine, I'll take your financial information. If you don't think you can trust the people where you live, that's okay. But then I thought about it and I thought, I better tell her family members that I'm getting her financial information, and she wanted me to have her financial information. And I asked my friend, can I call your niece, who was her closest family member, and let her know, this is what I'm doing? And my friend said, no, I already told her. Okay, so I'm now feeling very not good about this. And I'm thinking all the reasons why I should do my friend a favor, And I thought all it takes is for something really unfortunate to happen. And I am in hot water as to why in the world this person who's just a friend, who family doesn't know, is taking care of this woman's finances. So I cannot tell you how long it took me on this one. I went back and forth. And finally, I just couldn't figure out the words to say to her. I couldn't figure out what exactly was going on for me until somebody who actually I teach in coaching training asked me a great question. And the question was, how do you feel about this, Beth? How do you feel? And it clicked right in. I felt uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable. I was really uncomfortable. So that did it. I knew what I needed to say. I needed to go tell her, you know what, I don't feel comfortable with all the financial information coming to me. Well, I went to see her and I sat down. I said, I have to have a conversation with you about me receiving all of your financial information, all the information from your bank. And she said to me, Beth, I sense you don't feel comfortable with it. I said, that's it exactly. I don't feel comfortable. Thank you. Big sigh of relief. There it went. So that's my story about how a difficult conversation went much better than I thought it would have. But I'll tell you what made the difference for me was having a sense of what exactly I was feeling. So now I'm going to open it up. I'm going to unmute everybody, if I can here. I'm going to unmute you all. And then inviting folks who also have a situation where you had a difficult conversation and it went well to share that. All right, you're all unmuted. If you need to mute yourself back up again, go ahead. But you're unmuted on my end. So who has a story of a time a difficult conversation went better than you thought? who has a situation where a difficult conversation didn't go near as well as you would have thought?
I actually have one where the conversation went, the outcome was better than I thought. So it was with a boss, and I was feeling I feel that I was being very criticized. I felt like I was being criticized often, and that everything that I was doing wrong was pointed out. And I felt that I felt like I was being singled out specifically. And I struggled. I went through the whole thing, Beth, that you talked about, kind of going through what it's going to be. I even practiced it. I practiced it with my husband. I practiced it with another colleague who is kind of at a similar level as my boss. And it went well with both of those situations. I still, in my mind, had this feeling that the scenario with my boss was not going to go well, but I didn't have a choice. It was either do this or it was going to really be bad for my health in the long run. So I did have a conversation. So the conversation was really, like I said, about me being, singled out, and really that everything that I was doing was wrong, and that I had the perception that I was, that my boss felt like I was undermining him, and I was being singled out for that reason. And that was not the case at all. And so when I actually had the conversation, and sort of, he had his reasons as to why, and again, I'm just guessing that this is what he was going to say to me. I'm guessing why he was targeting me. And then I finally said, I'm feeling this way. Is there anything that I'm doing? And just really asked the question. And he really was surprised that I actually asked the question, just saying, no, that's not the case. But there were some situations that had happened that were misunderstandings. And one of the things that he was really focusing on is being looking at the positives and everything. And absolutely, we need to do that. There was a situation with family members, and I continued to just ignore the barriers that were in place for the family members. It wouldn't, they were bringing these things up to me, and so I needed to bring them up as it wasn't necessarily strengths-based, but these were real life barriers that we needed to talk about. And so I just sort of explained what some of the background information was, that there were family members telling me that they were really struggling with these barriers, and we needed to address them. We could not just ignore them and focus on, well, these are all the positive things that are happening. And so having that conversation, part of it was he was making assumptions about me, and I was making an assumption about him. And and part of it was because there were a lot of big stakes. It was a big situation in terms of there were families, there were agencies, there were systems, all kinds of things going on. We felt really bad,
Yeah.
with being able to share that feeling, and again, kind of clarifying that information that we had the clarification, it helped. So it did go better. And then from then on, our relationship changed significantly. So it was, I had this fear of, I don't know, I had worst case scenario, and I guess like I'm going to get fired or I'm going to be more targeted. I didn't know. And so once I actually had the conversation, we had a much better relationship. I think he respected me, the fact that I brought that up. So.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. And thanks, Anne. I think that's so true. In a nutshell, we come in with all kinds of different assumptions, which are different from what's true. And so many times it improves the relationship to have the conversation. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to mute everybody again, and then invite you to unmute yourself. And Alex is going to pick it up, and he's going to be talking about types of different conversations. I'm going to mute you and then go back to sharing my screen.
Great, thank you. So when we talk about understanding and preparing for types of difficult conversation, it's good to understand what types of conversations tend to be difficult. So the first type of conversation is the what happened or the what's happening conversations. So these are either going to be feedback conversations or conversations where there's an elephant in the room that nobody wants to address, and putting those things on the table. The potential traps in these kinds of conversations is that we imagine our version of the truth is correct. We invent the intentions of others, and we look to blame or punish others. So this can potentially emerge during a feedback conversation where you're piling on and you don't want to do that. You also don't want to make sure, you also want to come with an open mind and ask more questions. We'll get into that a little bit later. But what's happening and what happened conversations are very common types. The second is feelings. Beth went into that a little bit in her story, and Anne too went into the feelings that she was experiencing as a part of a difficult conversations as something to confront. Potential traps of the feelings conversations. I'll start with the second one first. So you can and you should feel comfortable talking about feelings in a professional setting. So feelings aren't too personal. A lot of people say, oh, well, feelings don't have any place in the workplace, but we're all human beings, and any organization, any group of people coming together, we're all just people. So not having the feeling conversation can lead to big problems. So this is a quote from the Difficult Conversations book. Missing feelings can be like an opera without music. You might get the plot, but you're missing the point. And sometimes you can have conversations where you feel like you've solved a problem, but really you haven't addressed the key point. And then the last type of difficult conversation is identity. So what does or what might this event say about me as a person, or how might I want to come across and have a conversation with somebody where it preserves their identity. So we've talked a little bit about SCARF and VUCA before. How do we manage SCARF not just for ourselves, but also for the other person? So we can go on to the next part. So we're going to shift difficult conversations into what we're calling learning conversations. So we wouldn't want to advocate for you to say necessarily, well, let's have a learning conversation about this. This is more just something in your mind to set your mindset about there's an opportunity to learn and to discover and have more information. So instead of being the person who puts something on the table, or instead of someone who is the bringer of bad news or is a crusader for justice, instead you're bringing something to have a discussion with. So much easier to have an even status relationship, easy to reinforce this idea of partnership when you're bringing something to the table with the intention to make everybody successful and to learn and grow together. So avoiding blaming and judging, looking backwards, avoiding assuming bad intentions, avoiding a propensity to dodge feelings and sort of table the feelings to another time that never comes, avoiding quick fix band-aids and something you'll just do for now, and avoiding this idea of it's your job to deliver a message. But instead, you're seeking contribution and you're seeking understanding and looking forward. So even if in a feedback conversation, you are learning about how you can support another person going forward. So instead, be curious about your intention and sharing impacts. So in Anne's situation, it was about, well, where might this behavior with the boss come from? And it turns out it's just a misunderstanding. So I think you'll find more often than not, a lot of things that happen that warrant a difficult conversation probably don't happen the way people intend. So you can enter a conversation being curious about their intention and share the impacts of what happened. Acknowledging feelings. So as we said before, very important to put your feelings on the table and share that as an impact. So thinking both in terms of short-term and long-term solutions. So not just what it'll do for now, but how can we really be partners and be thoughtful about how we want to take whatever plans we have set forward and create a new normal. And then, as I said before, instead of delivering the message, having a conversation. So really approaching something as something that you're going to work with a person together. So this learning conversations idea connects very easily with the coach approach. So we need to have presence to connect our conversations. And we'll talk a little bit about presence in yourself, so how you can prepare yourself to have these conversations. So you're listening to discover information, feelings, notions of threat to scarf. Again, this is both to the person that you're preparing to have a conversation with and for yourself. Can we really tune into what do we need out of this situation? Remember Beth's story about she was stuck for a little while and then she had the coaching conversation of how she's feeling? That to me sort of counts as this listening part. Clarifying to make sure intention is clear in communication. That's both on the what happened part of the difficult conversation, but also more importantly, it's for the go forward. So clarifying, okay, how do we want to take this forward and what are you committing to that are good uses of the clarifying skill. Next is asking good questions that support others in their development. Again, they're not why questions, but they're the what and how questions that are more present and future focused than past focused. And then finally, but very importantly, holding mutual accountability by sharing commitment to success. Just like in our uses of the coach approach in the past, we're coming into a situation where we're saying, what can you commit to change something going forward? And then what are you asking of me? And what can I commit to? And here's what I'm willing to do to take it forward. Again, reinforcing this idea of partnership. So in these types of conversation, just to be clear, you're having a conversation. So there's no necessarily a coach and a coachee like we've done before in our workshops. But instead, you're just two people trying to understand and manage a situation together. Difficult conversations come in all shapes and sizes, but we found the most success when we adhere to these ideas of like relatedness and fairness and partnership, and not being someone who's delivering a message, but instead people who are side by side trying to face something together. And remember, you're learning too. So just because something's a difficult conversation for you doesn't mean that the other person doesn't have anything that they're experiencing or that your version of the truth is correct. And you might find that while you're entering a conversation, there's a lot going on that you're not aware of. So if you're not prepared for that, it might take you by surprise. But instead, just be open about it and be curious about what might be going on that you're not seeing. So here's some strategies about having these learning conversations. So as I've said before, you're making it a conversation, not a monologue. And you want to have the conversation sooner rather than later. Timing is really important. And if things fester, people might be exhibiting behaviors that they don't mean to if they're doing something and they're not aware of the impact. Staying emotionally calm and present. That doesn't mean divorcing yourself from your feelings, but it just means being very clear about how you're feeling and what the impacts of that are. And that you should be not necessarily defensive or offensive, but sort of on an even keel in a mode where you're best equipped to really explore and be curious. Assuming positive intent. Hopefully the people that you're having a difficult conversation with, you trust them enough to have the conversation and you're not going to sever the relationship. So there must be something about that person that should be positive. Even if it's, for example, a boss or something like that, we can intend that they want to be a good boss, even if the behaviors they're exhibiting may have a negative impact. And to support them in being a better boss, you can share things, but that would be a positive intent. And be honest about feelings. Again, we've talked about feelings a lot, and I'm guessing we might talk about feelings a little bit later. But it's good, that's data, right? So just like impacts on processes, impacts on feelings also should be recognized. And then focusing on the go forward. Again, we're not looking to blame or to necessarily fix or solve, but what's the thing to take forward after a conversation? So just to really spell things out in case you're wondering what might a learning conversation look like, we're taking an adaptive approach from these 4 I's from the Rockwood Leadership Institute. So intention, incident, impact, and invention. So if you're familiar with that, there's a little bit of overlap, but we like to sort of break it down like this. So the first thing you want to do is prepare yourself. So getting present and holding your assumptions lightly, setting your intention for the outcomes that you're looking for. So what's happening? What is making this a difficult conversation? What's the thing that's important to you? Because again, you want to make sure that the thing that you want to have the conversation about, what's the focus of, and what's the message that you want it to get across to the other person? Very important. The second is to prepare the conversation. So intentionally choosing the time and space and asking permission for a conversation. So this might probably not be a boardroom meeting or having a one-on-one conversation in public, but a place where you feel like you'll be really comfortable, and a place where the person that you're speaking to can also be comfortable. The third step is getting the other person's self-assessment if appropriate. So how do you think that went, or what's, how do you feel about such and such? To really start this idea of a conversation. So you're not coming to them to lay it all out on the table, but even by starting with a question, you're beginning to reinforce this idea of a partnership. So very important. 4 is you share what you've observed, describing objective observable actions. So you don't want to linger on this part, but you want to share what happened. And then 5 is sharing the impacts of those actions as appropriate. So that can include feelings and senses of identity. So you noticed, or you observed, or you experienced X, and the impact that had on you or is having on others is Y. So making those things very clear. So 6 is asking for input and perspective and discuss the go forward. So it's not something that, again, that you're telling someone that you want to see differently, but you're asking them, how do you want to see this differently? Or how do you imagine the go forward being? You can also include your perspective, but again, you don't want it to be so one-sided. And then finally, offering support in the go forward if appropriate. Being curious and genuinely interested in how can I support you going forward. Okay, so this is a real life example for my wife, who needed to have a somewhat difficult conversation with me. So I told her that I would practice Spanish, and I did, to visit her family in Peru. And my level of Spanish was not up to snuff. So this is what my wife did to have a difficult conversation with me. So the first thing that she did was she prepared herself to have a conversation. I don't know how much of that she did. I don't know what that was, but I know that she was very thoughtful about when we had the conversation. So then she said, "Hi, sweetie, can we talk about Peru over dinner?" So that's preparing the conversation. And then she asked me, "How do you think my Spanish was in Peru?" And I knew it wasn't great. I knew that there were points where my wife had to be translator a little bit. So this gave me an opportunity to come at this conversation saying, gosh, I really thought things would be easier, but people talked really fast, and my level of my level of Spanish was not what I thought it was. So that was clear to me. So she spelled it out very clearly that she noticed that I had to look at my phone a lot to use Google Translate in order to translate what my parents said. So the dialogue wasn't so clear. And then the impact of that was she got frustrated at the time having to be the translator. So there were times she got exhausted and didn't want to do it anymore. There was a time when we all went out to lunch, and I just didn't talk to anybody because everybody was just talking, and Gabriella didn't want to be my translator. So that happened, and that was the impact of her being exhausted. So she said it's important to her that I learn Spanish so I can have a better relationship with her parents. And I can decide how to do that, whether that's a Spanish class or an app or what have you. And then she offered, if you'd like, she's more than happy to help me practice with me and teach me. So what do I think? So what she could have done was said that this is awful, and therefore it means I don't care about her or her parents or that relationship. But instead, she talked very specifically about what happened, what the impact was, and then what I need to change and what she's able to do. So even though I didn't have a great, my Spanish wasn't great, and that left an impact that was unfortunate, there's a very clear go forward. And my relationship with my wife doesn't linger, and there's no going to bed or at nighttime resentment. It was put on the table, she shared everything, and now we have a clear go forward. And I have a Spanish e-learning thing that I'm doing, so it works. The next one, okay. So here's just a very bare bones thing to try in about 5 minutes to have a learning conversation using a coach approach feedback model. So first, you want to be clear that the intention of feedback is to always help people be more effective. So even just the words, I'm telling you this because I want you to be successful or to continue to be successful. So the things you can do is, first question, how do you think that went? Second, what did you notice? This is what I saw, this is what I noticed, and here's the impact of that. Now, as I share the impact, what are you thinking now that we're talking about this? And now here's what I'm thinking. These are my requests. Next time, could you please? And what can you commit to on top of my requests? We'll have probably some content around requests and offers and commitments later on, but good to try these out here. And then lastly, do you have any requests for me? And then how can I support you? So with that, we're going to move into a question, or we're going into final tips.
I think final tips looking at the time.
Okay, so the final tips would be, you're not putting something on the table to be the harbinger of a hard truth, but something that you're discussing together. And you want to begin your conversation in a firm but not aggressive way. You want to be clear about your observations and the impacts of those things, but you also want to not make assumptions that they were done maliciously or with bad intent. And then being clear about what the facts are and what are assumptions. So the facts are the rules of the game to operate within, and assumptions can be shared with a curiosity about other perspectives.
You know, and I think as we close, Alex, because we're close to on time, I think for me, the biggest takeaways in terms of difficult conversations are to be really clear as much as we can about our feelings, to make sure it's a conversation, and to focus on the go forward. Focus on the go forward. If we start looking at why and what happened and how did it happen and who said this and what, it's a rabbit hole. So next time, could you please, this is what I'd like going forward. Speaking of going forward, we have our next community of practice call on July 8th at 2 with Ellen. I apologize for not introducing Ellen, our partner, at the very beginning. Many of you know Ellen. If you don't, you will soon, or you should. Ellen, can you say hi? Jump back on and unmute yourself and say hi to everybody.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Beth. Just 30 seconds. Alex and Beth laid out a really great framework for how we address difficult conversations. So my request to all of you is come to the learning circle with some difficult conversations that you have avoided. And we'll do some work together during our hour together to put this framework into application.
Great. Thanks so much, Ellen. And thank you all. Thanks, everybody. Apologies for the blips. It's always a learning together. So thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of the week. And we look forward to seeing you in the learning conversation in our community practice with Ellen next month on July 8th. Take care.